Welcome. Hi, I am Max Steinbeis from the Verfassungsblog, the Constitution blog, and I'm going to talk to you about the Thuringia project. The federal state of Thuringia is in central Germany. If you have ever been there, you will know that it's a very beautiful state. There are great bratwursts to have there, and many other reasons to be interested in the place. Just over 2 million people live there. The state capital is called Erfurt, and the minister-president, prime minister, is called Bodo Ramelow, and he's from the Left Party. He governs together with the Social Democrats and Greens. In the last parliament, he's entered into a minority situation where the Conservatives tolerate him, while the CDU still regards the Left Party as extremist. They still take part in stabilizing that majority, and the experience from this time, this legislature is nearing its end. There will be elections in the state of Thuringia this year, and just as in Saxony and Brandenburg, where there will also be elections, the right extremist AfD is leading opinion polls significantly, and they will be the strongest party in the parliament in the federal state. And their head person and the leader of the local party is called Björn Höcke, and he's a Nazi. And they can expect around 30% of the vote, and it can be expected that more than a third of the members of parliament will be AfD members. So all resolutions in parliament that need a two-thirds majority will be able to be blocked, presumably, by that party. And that's something I'll get to later on. And we all remember the 5th of February in 2020, when the current parliament started. And that was the day when a certain Thomas Kemmerich from the Liberals became their prime minister, minister-president, and that then caused an unprecedented constitutional crisis in the state, which had been instigated by the AfD deliberately, and Kemmerich and his Liberal Party and the CDU had roles that the AfD had designated for them and were willingly playing along. So a lot of things come together in the state of Thuringia. And that's why we, as the Constitution blog, decided to run a project on Thuringia. What is actually happening if things will come as we fear they will? What will it mean if the AfD, an authoritarian populist party, will become the largest party in the Thuringia parliament? What does it mean if they will gain more than 33%, which is their openly stated goal? And that is not not a random figure, as we will see. What does it mean if they take part in government, or if the executive will be in their hands, if they if we maybe have an authoritarian interior minister, justice minister, prime minister, perhaps even? These are the questions that we investigated, and we had more than 120 long and intense conversations with people from politics, from administration, from security people, with civil society, from the courts. And we've talked with all of these people what it would look like if this would become a reality, if this were to become a reality, what options the populists would have to put their strategies into practice, which weaknesses they will find in the current state order, and what we would have to do to remove these weaknesses, but also what they themselves could do and would have to do as people with important decision-making positions, and how they could prepare themselves, how they could strengthen themselves, how they could become more resilient. That is the Thuringia project, and before I will talk to you about what I have found out, I'll have to say a few things about, well, what it actually is, the authoritarian populist strategy. What does that entail, and why is it something more and different to regular political strategies, which simply aim for a political majority for someone's own views and their own party, which every party tries to do. The pioneer of a strategy like this, the co-inventor, and who was very successful, more than anyone else perhaps, is this nice young man here. If you don't recognize him, this is Viktor Orbán, pictured 30 years ago. Orbán in the 1980s, as a student, was active in the anti-communist underground in Budapest, and after the end of communist rule in the early 90s, the liberal opposition split up into one part that cooperated with the post-communists and another part that radically opposed this, but then also opened themselves up to the right wing. And Orban put himself at the forefront of this faction, and the party that he headed was a liberal youth movement, but then turned to really operating this split. And they presented themselves as patriotic, and the opposition was defamed as cosmopolitan, corrupt, and so on. He became the prime minister and pictured himself as the representation of the true Hungary, and he immediately took over positions such as the state prosecutor, and when he then was voted out of office, he used this, according to his own strategy, as a proof that the whole system is flawed. The homeland cannot be in opposition, which was a literal quote from a protest rally in Budapest once. And yes, the homeland, represented by Orban's Fidesz party, was not in opposition for the next 8 years. They were kind of not in the sense of a reserve faction to enter government at the next opportunity. No, he used every opportunity to systematically and radically obstruct government, and such opportunities existed manifold, because many decisions on staffing and legislation had to be taken with a two-thirds majority. So the government majority was not enough. The opposition had to be included and had to cooperate, which is not what Orban did. He blocked and obstructed in a planned way wherever he could. And with that he created a new reality. He didn't understand the opposition as a competitor for democratic majorities, but as an enemy. And he delegitimized the other side as being unfit to represent the people, and they contributed to cement this reality, actually, by what they did. And then the finance crisis came, and Hungary was highly in debt. In 2010, the socialists finally had become so unpopular that Orban, with his party, won an absolute majority. And the Hungarian electoral system has an oddity where this absolute majority was immediately converted into a two-thirds majority in the parliament. And you will know the rest of the story. Orban, with his two-thirds majority, created a completely new constitution. He subjected the media and the whole state apparatus in a targeted and very intricate way to make it impossible for anyone other than his own party to be in government. All institutions, all levers of power, from the electoral law to the court system, have been set in a way to reproduce Orban's single rule. There was no coup, there was no abolishment of the constitution, no one was arrested, and still the result is an authoritarian regime that realistically cannot be unseated, unhinged using democratic means, not because Orban is so successful in government, but because he used the power that he had in a strategic way to ensure that he would never have to give it up again. You know this guy? Everyone does. So a new example, the US. Let's again go back a few decades. In 2004, 20 years ago, a long time before this person entered the political stage, in 2004, the American constitutionalist Mark Tusenetz observed that a new practice was spreading, which he called constitutional hardball. So that is the adult variety of baseball in contrast to softball, which is more played by children. So playing hardball as a metaphor means to use every legitimate and illegitimate means to achieve your aims. And the observation was that in the Senate, so one chamber of the US Congress, the opposition would block nominations of federal judges more and more. The Senate has to confirm these nominations, and if they don't, the president is in trouble. And that happened more and more from both sides. in the federal states, in the states such as Texas or Colorado, suddenly the Republicans, without any emergency need, changed the setup of the districts, electoral districts. And in the other part of the Congress, an impeachment procedure was started against President Clinton, although there was no realistic chance of success. And that was allowed. It was in their power. They had the right to do this. But until then, it had been taken as given that these rights wouldn't be used, but only in a very moderate, in a very reticent way. And that was the point where Tuznec actually observed a real shift. And the diagnosis was that if this kind of constitutional hardball is spreading in government, then this is part of a fight for the institutions, for control of the constitutions. And his analysis then ended with a prophecy. I assume that constitutional hardball, we will experience more constitutional hardball until the Republican Party has established their rule in all parts of the institutions, or until they've understood that it will not happen in the foreseeable future. That's how this essay 20 years ago closed, and now, 20 years later, after the storm on the Capitol in January 2020, in view of the quite open announcements by Donald Trump and his allies, if they were to win the presidential vote, a sporting metaphor such as hardball doesn't seem quite appropriate anymore. A military analogy would be more appropriate, it seems. But in substance, the prophecy has completely been realized until now.
That's the strategy. You claim to speak on behalf of the people, to be betrayed by the elites, and this narrative is underlined by your own actions. You can do this as long as you're not in power, and as soon as you assume power, you continue. Whatever the political opponent is doing, you're always winning. If they try to oppose this strategy, they just confirm the narrative that the populists are minimalized and victimized. And if he doesn't, that if the institutions and media are subjugated, and this means that authoritarianism feeds its own narrative. It's the narrative of we and only we represent the people. We and only we exert power and are supposed to exert powers, and everyone else is a loser. Populism, authoritarian populism, is a global movement that can be found anywhere on the globe, even in the oldest and purportedly most stable democracies in the world. In India, in Brazil, in Israel, in Turkey, Poland, just to name a few. And even where we succeeded to get rid of it, the institutions, years after, are riddled with the damage. In Germany, we're not that far yet, but we can still see the effects of that strategy, especially with the AfD. It is part of most parliaments, and it's one of many opposition parties. It has limited power, but it understands how to use this power. It doesn't have power, but it has rights. Rights to be informed, right to be part of the political formation of opinions. And also the opposition can question the government. They can do inquiries, and these inquiries must be answered. The answer mustn't be complete, but it must be answered, even if it's a lot of work. In the Thuringian country parliament, the AfD alone had 2,800 inquiries in just this legislative period. That's more than twice as much as the CDU fraction, which is also in the opposition. So that means that the government has so much work to do just to answer these inquiries. You don't need to empathize with them, that's their job, but they have to provide all that material and have to fight against the accusations, basically. When laws are being published, you often don't have enough members of parliament in order to be competent to take a decision. And that means that a complicated and long process comes into place to count the members of parliament that are present, and often that fails. And that means that decisions can't be taken. And the other possibility is to reject the application, which the committee can also do. But that would mean giving evidence or giving material to the AfD for their narrative that the system is corrupt and the system isn't acting according to its own standards. So whatever you do, the populists win. That's part of the strategy. That's harmless and that's manageable. But if in September in the state elections the AfD will have more votes than the opposition, if it were to become the strongest force, which is conceivable, they would have the right to nominate a candidate for the state parliament president, which is a very high position. This person doesn't make politics, but they ensure that politics can be made by the other members of parliament. And you can see that the three dark dots, that's the presidents of the parliament. They're apart from the rest of the parliament. So the parliament president is the administrative body to ensure that every member of parliament has the same rights, has the same opportunities, the same resources, and so on. And it's also the president of the parliament that signs the laws published or adopted by the parliament. And that's a very subtle position. And you can easily imagine what would happen if this position was taken by an authoritarian party, the huge potential for misuse. Now, the AfD can only propose that person. That doesn't mean that the person is elected. You have to have a majority for that, and that usually isn't a problem because it should be in everyone's interest to keep this position democratic. But in this case, there are good reasons not to do that. And it might always happen what happens when authoritarian parties take power. You get complaints, and there's a dilemma you can't get out of, you can't resolve. The dilemma is not a fault of the democracy, it is the democracy. Let's assume AfD will win more than a third of the seats in the Thuringian state parliament this year. So you see that Höcke and his cronies have extensively studied the laws. So you need a 2/3 majority for most decisions, so that you can't take decision against the AfD if they had more than a third of the votes, of the seats. So they could block, like, the election of judges on the state court. We often talk about the Karlsruhe Federal Constitutional Court, but especially the technical nuts and bolts of governing the state constitutional courts are really important. And the judges for the state constitutional court have to be elected with a 2/3 majority, which is regulated in the constitution, so it's unavoidable. So you have a blocking constellation if a third refuses to partake in the elections. And in the legislative period starting in September, a lot of judges, all of the judges have to be elected again. And if you have a blocking constellation like that, this will massively damage the court. And of course, the AfD will be able to claim that the other parties are responsible. And if they resign to that pressure and elect the AfD-favored candidates, they can act as, like they can blow up the system and politicize the proceedings of the court, which would mean that there would be majorities and minorities all the time, and the internal workings of the court would be damaged. And however this happens, AfD always wins. And there's other ways they could block the parliamentary proceedings. So, for example, the judges for the normal courts, if the members of the election committee for judges isn't constituted, the judge positions can't be filled. And this is also a massive potential damage to the court system. 30 to 50% of the judge positions in Thuringia need to be refilled this year, and the AfD knows that the leverage they have here, and they've shown that they can use it. And all of this are things that the AfD could do without even being in the government. We had the communal elections in Thuringia this weekend. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. There were fears that a large number of AfD district commissioners could be elected. This didn't happen. The county administrations are also have huge potential for misuse. For example, to just take one example, weapon licenses could be made easier, and no one would have any leverage against that. And of course, the state authorities could work against that, but they're also kind of restricted and limited in Thuringia. Now, assuming the AfD actually takes part in the state government and takes over ministries such as the Justice Ministry, wherever authoritarian populists are in the government, justice is always the first institution that goes under the wheels. And in Germany, the legislative foundations that that justice works on, what they can change is how the justice system is constituted. So there are mechanisms in filling positions where we need good applicants, and Thuringia is just a small state, and there's just one university that offers law studies. So there's a lack of promising candidates. And if right-wing law students realize that Thuringia is a hub for right-wing extremists, you could suddenly have a lot of right-wing applicants to judicial positions in Thuringia. And the ministry can ensure that they have it easy to climb up the ladder. So this is always a question of power. And other parties are trying strategies like that as well. And if you have your cronies in legislative positions, you can use that. And it's very difficult to get rid of such persons.
The Interior Ministry also is very important regarding authoritarian populist positions. They govern polices, the Interior Intelligence Agency. So whoever is the minister there, at any time they could completely replace people in these key institutions with people that are completely in line with their positions. So this observation that AfD and Nazis in general are being... The fact that they are being observed by the Interior Intelligence Agency in the state would be a thing of the past. They are still observed at the federal level, but still the persecution or the observation would then be moved on to minorities, Muslims or whatever. Now, if the actual state government, the minister-president, will fall into the AfD's hands, this is where the media political power is centered. Educational policy and broadcasting and media are competencies that are put on that the German Constitution has placed at the federal state level. So you have the public broadcasters are local, and they could then cancel all kinds of contracts with just one signature, and that signature will have to be made by the minister-president, by the prime minister. They wouldn't even need their own cabinet to agree. So if they are in a coalition, their coalition partners would not be able to change anything there. It wouldn't need a parliamentary debate, no public conversation. There will be a period of 2 years, and if like a cancellation period, a retention period, but then you would be completely out of public media if that's what they want. They would have to provide some kind of media supply, but what that would consist of is unknown territory. And if they were to kind of set up a homeland radio station or whatever, that might be it. And the basis for the broadcasting fees also, which is agreed between the federal states, they could abolish that, and the other states that will want to retain their public broadcasters would have to raise their fees. Also, private media is vulnerable. There's only one newspaper publisher in the state left. And if you can imagine an oligarchs with a Russian role model, say the Funke media group, who have the monopoly position, if they were given a kind of offer, an attractive offer to convert if someone were to buy up all the very small local media, you could imagine that even economically that oligarch would gain from only commenting on affairs the way the government would want to. And you have enough material to learn from other countries. Also, of course, the Prime Minister has a significant budget for cultural activities, theatre, for example, and who would be given that money and who would not is something that the Prime Minister's office could decide quite independently. An education minister from the AfD could rearrange the curriculums, or universities, if the science ministry were to be an AfD position, they could stop certain kinds of research. So the state government could turn the government into an identitarian cabinet of mirrors where people just see themselves. The kind of people's identity that they claim as an historical fact, they could actually try to create. And that then has its effects in democracy, in the kinds of results that you have in votes or elections. You cannot manipulate very much in terms of breaking the constitution. There are protections in electoral law, for example, that cannot easily be changed. But the more easy it will be with referendums, which is something that the AfD is a big fan of in any case, if you presuppose to know the true will of the people, which the AfD does, then a referendum, of course, is something very attractive to you. And in their manifesto, they call for referendums in the style of Switzerland, as they say. But that would mean that there is no constitutional court left to look after, to inspect the results of such a vote. So anti-minaret laws, referendums, as has happened in Switzerland, would normally not get through in Germany because of the constitutional courts, but the AfD has a different vision. Another thing, in 2023, last year, in the federal parliament, the AfD called for a change of the constitution to allow the government to put questions to determine the will of the people in front of the people. It sounds nice, sounds like grassroots democracy, but it is in no way linked to that. It's just an empowerment of government, not of the people, because the government, whenever they are in conflict with the constitution, could call on the people and ask a question that is formulated in a way that it kind of predetermines the answer. To give an extreme example, would you like Muslim rapists to attack women or not? If you find that an extreme kind of wording, just ask what kind of questions Viktor Orban is asking in his consultations. He is a master in using this mechanism, this tool, and such consultations of the people are not provided for in the constitution of the state of Thuringia, but they're not explicitly excluded either. So you could say that the government could simply enact a law introducing this tool. So what could you do? In the last few months, we've talked a lot about party bans and other preventative measures that democracy might use to reduce the threat of authoritarian populists, but that's not enough. Just as important as repression is anticipation, recognizing how those strategies work, because only then can we see what you can contribute so that these strategies won't work, or at least not as easily. And that is what we aim for, and that is the aim of this talk. I'll be finished soon, yes. Really. So anyone who knows a bit more about these mechanisms is a win for the resilience of democracy. The party may be difficult to look into, but the strategies are quite open. Thank you.